Recording. What is the most important photograph of all time? Some of you might have already seen me advance the slide, so you're welcome to cheat and tell me what's coming next. So, what is the most important photograph of all time? So, when you write your homework this weekend, or when you finish it, um, don't necessarily pick the only most famous, but pick a famous photograph, and you want to consider, what makes it a milestone in history. Yeah. So, what would you say is, of course, the most recent milestone in history in the last, since the invention of photography? I think some people might say one of these two. I think these are arguably the two most important photographs of all time. Let's start with this one. So, what makes this photograph the most, arguably one of the most important photographs of all time? What are we looking at here? Anyone want to say what we're looking at here? Any guesses? Yes, yeah, I think that's a good answer. James said it showcases the scale of destruction of the atomic bomb. So we have the capacity to destroy things, um, unlike any time before in human history, with the scale of destruction that you see here. So scale is really important here. The clouds themselves are dwarfed by the mushroom cloud. What else does this tell us? One, we're very destructive. What else? Is there anything else that what other meaning can you assign to this photograph apart from human beings are very destructive? Anything positive? Of course, these are all questions you should consider when you write about your famous photograph for your final paper. Well, I might add, this is oh, wait, let me see what someone says. They said the scale of war. Good. Yeah, the scale of war that we're able to industrialize warfare to the point that at this point, you could say this thing makes war obsolete because it assures mutual destruction. And so the idea is the only way to win is to not play, which is true for tic-tac-toe. It's also true for love and also for nuclear war. So you don't want to enter nuclear war or it's over for everybody. So you could say the silver lining of the nuclear weapon is that it makes war obsolete. And of course, I'm sure that's not true, but for at least a time period, it has made war obsolete. And, or at least you could say all out war is obsolete because you don't want to grab the biggest tool in the arsenal, biggest weapon in the arsenal. So you might also say the positive side of nuclear war, of course, is that we have nuclear power and the ability to work at the atomic level. So, yes, there's a destructive power, but anything destructive is also creative. And like I said, we also live in peace because of the assurance of mutual annihilation. And so, what is another important photograph? Well, I think we saw it a moment ago. This photograph here. So, which one do you think is more important? The one on the left or the one on the right? Seems like Edwin, you seem to be the only one answering, so I'll just keep asking you. Edwin, what do you think? Or no, I'm just kidding. I guess James too. Sorry. Oh, no, putting Edwin on the spot. Anyone else can answer too. I'm just having a dialogue with Edwin and James right now. Which one would you say is the more important photograph? The one on the left or the one on the right? Someone said, yeah, I think the moon one feels a little nicer because maybe it's in color. What would you say is the significance of the one on the right, James? Anyone else want to answer? What is the significance of the photograph on the right? How small? Okay, good. So that's great. I like that you went to that side of the kind of up the significance because it's not just it's not just hold on just a moment. It's not just the fact that we've we have the ability to reach the moon, but now also from the moon, we can look back at Earth and realize that we are a tiny, insignificant speck of dust surrounded by a sea of nothingness. And that's a real eye-opener because that helps us understand that Earth is more valuable than we realize when we don't have a, second Earth to go to. We don't have a backup. If we do, it's very far away, almost like impossibly far. In fact, I was watching a video last night that suggests that mathematically we may not there may not be other life in the universe, which is kind of hard to believe, but that's just because it's so rare, the conditions that would lead to life and all the different things that contribute to complex life, like photosynthesis, plate tectonics, having a larger than normal core because the moon or an ancient moon combined or an ancient planet collided with Earth, resulting in us having a bigger core than your typical planet. The moon is actually the remains of that planet that collided with us. We have a tilt on our planet. We have precession with all kinds of factors that photosynthesis that leads to life, and it's so rare. So this picture on the right is very significant on many levels. We're at the moon, and when we get to the moon, it's not like when Columbus arrived to the New World and there were Native Americans there. There's no one to infect with smallpox. There aren't really even any resources to extract profitably. So the big revelation when we get to the moon is, wow, it's just a rock. Who knows? Maybe we'll discover the merits of the moon, other merits. But for now, we can say that we got to the moon and we haven't been back because there's really no reason to. It's as if Columbus arrived in the New World and never went back because he's like, no, why bother? It's just too expensive or too. We've been there. There's nothing to gain. And so we are kind of looking at another Columbian kind of adventure, but without the payoff. And of course, maybe without the smallpox. What else would you say, looking back at Earth? When you look at Earth, you see, wow, we are like a blue planet with this, as Neil Armstrong said, like a lacy kind of surface of clouds. And you don't see borders, you don't see politics. You don't hear people screaming about Trump or Bush or Obama from this far away or Biden or Harris. It's just quiet. And so you see the earth as in terms of its unity, its entirety, and you kind of overcome those divisions visually here by getting this view that's so far away that you kind of put it into kind of a global context. So this is kind of globalization in terms of us being able to finally see the earth from afar, from the moon. And it reminds us that we're all one, kind of. And I think this is why people attribute the birth of the environmental movement to this picture of the Earth from the moon, because it's a moment where we have to reflect on our kind of unity as a human race rather than individual countries. Although, if we discover aliens on another planet, I'm sure there'll be different kinds of aliens. There'll be, oppressed aliens and non-oppressed aliens. I mean, maybe not, but that's, I think, why it's so interesting, the idea of discovering intelligent life, because we want to know how much they resemble us and in what ways they don't. And that's why I think the moon is such kind of a buzzkill because we didn't find anything on the moon. And so we really had to take care of Earth because there's really no other easy alternative to Earth. So if you want to write about these pictures for your final paper, by all means, pick one or the other. But I'd say pick other photos too, because there's many others to choose from, of course. But let's go ahead and move into the 20th century, the latter half, with this interesting period between World War II and kind of, I'd say, the Andy Warhol era of art, when we have this kind of flash of photorealistic kind of art from the likes of Norman Rockwell, who is someone that many people know of, but isn't really regarded, I think, as a kind of equal to like Andy Warhol or U.S. artists after World War II by art historians, because I think Norman Rockwell is a little more populist, a little more hunky-dory, a little more kind of ground level than the kind of elitism of the art world, especially with all these immigrants pouring into Europe, to the United States from Europe after World War II and during World War II as they escape Hitler, pollinating the United States with this interest in abstract art. Norman Rockwell's art seemed to go against the grain. But nevertheless, this is why it's so important to have art that's naturalistic, because you can tackle subject matter that you really would have a hard time tackling with abstract art. Now, there's exceptions, of course, with Guernica and Picasso, but even Picasso, I think, would have a hard time translating this subject into abstract art. So what are we looking at here? What is this painting depicting? Has anyone seen this painting before? It says. Yes, a statement on so this is the era after World War II when the Republican President Eisenhower integrates schools. It's a federal mandate to integrate schools, so the federal government supersedes local authority on this matter. And this is a scene depicting the girl being escorted by four federal agents to school. So this is the federal government escorting the girl to school. And you see the four men were obviously at eye level with the girl. It's a very clever use of composition to put us at eye level with the girl. So we're kind of seeing everything from the kid's perspective. And there's so much to say about this painting. First off, what is that guy carrying in his pocket on the upper left? Well, that's probably a letter from Eisenhower, and the letter probably says, "Let this girl go to school." So it's a very powerful picture of authority, almost like providing shelter to her, protecting her as she goes to school. Something as innocent as going to school. We saw this picture at the beginning of the semester. I pointed out that her wearing white is a very clever way of subverting maybe the idea of white and black here, where she's African American, but she's wearing a white dress because the whole idea is the whiteness signifies purity and innocence, and that she's pure and innocent because she's a kid. She's going to school. And you notice she's unfazed by the tomato that was thrown at her. And that I think is one of the most powerful parts of the picture, that she's not looking back at the painting or inspecting her dress for stains. She's just confidently walking forward. And that's a really powerful lesson in life, to not, feed the troll. And it looks like they had bad aim, so they missed with a tomato. But it's another example of cleverly using color, emotionally and otherwise, to show violence and racism. Of course, this tomato symbolizes racism, but also to stain a white dress red on your first day of school is really, if you remember school back then when everyone's so self-conscious, that would have been horrifying. So there's a lot going on in this picture, but I think another key part is movement. The idea that she's walking forward, the men are walking forward, and the tomato is kind of floundering in the back, and so they're moving forward, they're moving past the tomato. In other words, the painting is about progress, and her footsteps correspond to progress. And so always remember, when you look at artwork, and consider the symbolism or the meaning, deeper meaning beyond the superficial appearance of things, that yes, she's walking, but the footsteps symbolize progress and moving forward and advancement, and always try to consider the greater significance of minor little details like that when you look at artwork. For instance, here's a woman walking to school. This is not the same girl, but very similar, a little older in this case. And just look at those women screaming at her from behind. I encourage you to write about these pictures if you want. They just look so angry. And it seems so kind of strange, I think, to you, to me, to see this. And that's why photography is so important, because it captures something that really needs to be seen, and captures a moment that probably, I don't think these people are maybe alive anymore, but if they were, they'd probably be very ashamed of themselves for being so kind of unnecessarily cruel. I mean, what are they upset about? Someone going to school? Yeah, so really shocking era, and time to be alive. And these paintings are all trying to address this stuff. And, is abstract art capable of addressing moments like these? Yeah, no, but that's why I feel like a lot of the art world has lost touch with the average person, because not just because it's so kind of form for form's sake, but because it's lost a lot of the journalistic quality that I've been stressing is so important for art, to kind of advocate, to visualize things that need to be seen, to just talk about things that need to be talked about. And so artists now are kind of almost neutered or unable to address, not all, there's many exceptions, but many artists today, or at least I'd say the general momentum of art, is not aligned with journalism, but rather, now, of course, there's a lot of politics today and anti-Trump stuff, but I'm not talking about kind of just politics. I'm talking about like historical, transcendental things like arriving on the moon, 9/11, uh, going to the first girl going to school, things, moments like these, which speak to much more than just kind of who's the president kind of thing. So what's going on in this moment right here? It's a little tricky. You got to take your time to kind of dissect it, right? The first thing I notice is that big gaping space between them. And that big gaping space is significant, very much like, Adam touching God's hand in the birth of Adam. Um, this idea of using an empty space as a kind of to symbolize something. And in this case, that empty space divides the cat from the dog too. And notice the dog, which is a German Shepherd, which I think is significant because that's the kind of dog the police would use in the race riots in the 1960s. The dog is too young to know whether it's supposed to chase the cat. And I think that is a wonderful microcosm of the bigger picture here, which is these kids are too young to know to be racist. So here they are, the kids on the right are arriving at the walkway entrance to the home of the kids on the left who are moving in. How do we know they're moving in? Well, because the guy's pushing the objects out of the moving truck instead of pushing them up into it. So we know these kids are moving into this neighborhood, presumably, arriving in a neighborhood where there aren't many African American people, so it's integrating the neighborhood. And these kids on the right are showing up with a little mix of curiosity, but also because they want to do what? Well, they want to play baseball. And how do we know that? Well, they have a glove. They're wearing Jackie Robinson's Brooklyn Dodgers colors. In fact, the car in the back, the truck has the Brooklyn Dodgers colors there. And on the left, the kid on the left is holding a baseball glove. So I think we can, or you could argue that at the end of this encounter, the kids move beyond the sort of space separating them and they play baseball. Because, I mean, why wouldn't you? You're kids, you want to play baseball, you need a certain number of people to play baseball. And so that superseding desire to play baseball negates the racism that makes people not play baseball together. And here is this context from which these photographs spring. This is the sit-ins at diners in the South. That's Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights leader. Context of students protesting the Vietnam War, Kent State, where a kid was shot. Um, Martin Luther King addressing the Capitol. And so, civil rights movement, Vietnam War, environmental movement, gay rights, art, bohemians, beatniks, hippies, Charles Manson, John F. Kennedy getting assassinated, the Beatles. I mean, what a kind of almost like a insane decade of change, and almost probably so much change that's hard for people to process so quick, that so much change so quickly. And yet it's necessary change because the United States can't go around lecturing the world about the Soviet Union and the Cold War when we have segregation and all kinds of internal problems. So here is a great chance to see how the photographs inform the paintings. You notice he uses photographs as a model for his paintings, and there's some slight changes you notice. He brings the kids together on the right. On the left, he has the one kid tilt his head ever so much to the right. And there's Jackie Robinson of the Brooklyn Dodgers there, who was the first African American baseball player. So during the war, as we saw World War II, we saw the integration of the army, then of course integration of schools and integration of sports. And Norman Rockwell also tackles other subjects too. This would be you guys on the way to school with the dog going, kind of hoping the kid doesn't go to school, but obviously the boy is much more interested in the bus that's arriving to take him to school. We know he's going to school because it says State U on his luggage, and the father's probably didn't go to college, he's paying for school, and probably a mechanic or something. So very kind of speaking to everyday life in the United States after World War II. Even this is kind of celebration of Rosie the Riveter, turning her into an icon of of uh, female, women joining the workforce and contributing during World War II after, being excluded from men's work before World War II. Some Michelangelo references here. And of course, the world shifts dramatically apart from the art world. We also see pop culture becoming a major part of life. As you guys all know, growing up in the United States, or probably everywhere in the world now, it's all about television, and now, of course, smartphones and materialism. And I think this picture really speaks to the materialism of the 1950s, because you really can't go to the lake without having all this stuff with you. One boat, a lawnmower, a pool, a bike, Wheaties, golf, and these are some of the kind of pictures from the World War II and how they contrast with the age of advertisement. I'm as patriotic as can be, and ration points won't worry me. So rationing for World War II, my grandmother would have been like this. Well, at least one of my grandmothers really, obsessed with rationing and preserving things. But then after World War II, you get stuff like this. It says going from shop to shop, counter to counter, you spend something you didn't bargain on, energy. So when you're tired and thirsty, go straight to the soda fountain, enjoy Coca-Cola, basically. So what a difference. The women on the left with an apron preserving things, and women on the right kind of spending freely and out shopping. And of course, technology is a liberating tool. It liberates people from nature, right? It liberates you from having to wash dishes or do clothing or sew things by hand. Elon Musk has machines doing all the building of most of the cars rather than men. So it also, you could say, liberates men from having to be just beasts of burden. Um, and now we're kind of living in that kind of postmodern world of, well, maybe AI is going to do all of our jobs for us one day. And what does that mean about the value of work? And I think it's a horrifying thing to think about people not having a livelihood. You'd want to fill your time with doing art or making something, but it's hard to imagine a world without people working because work is so much more than just doing stuff. It's dignity, it's pride, it's contribution, it's status. It's all kinds of good things in addition to the bad things. Gets you out of the bed in the morning, makes you go do things that you might not want to do, but in the end, you're happy that you do them. But for a while, I think we've really kind of been indulging in this materialistic world still. Here, I think it's, opening a bottle cap, a bottle of ketchup, make it easier so, quote, woman can open it. Very fascinating to think about how they advertise things to different genders, different races, to children versus adults. And the painting on the right is a way of making fun of all these advertisements. This is by one of the immigrants to the United States from Europe, an artist named Willem de Kooning. I think he was from Germany, in fact. I might be wrong about that. But he had seen all these advertisements of women smiling and looking all red lipsticks and everything. So the painting on the right is a kind of a way of lampooning or making fun of the advertisements he sees everywhere. Certainly not a flattering picture of a woman. Don't worry, darling, you didn't earn the beer. So now I think today, if you saw ad, it would be more making fun of the husband, like the stupid Homer Simpson like husband who always messes things up. Back then, it was like treating the woman very patronizingly. Maybe one day we'll reach a place where we don't need to like patronize each other. Right now, we live in like peak estrangement of the sexes because of online dating and all kinds of other reasons. So who knows what will happen there? But definitely technology disrupts a lot of things. World War II disrupted a lot of things. And of course, advertising and celebrity go hand in hand. But the idea of a baseball player like Jackie Robinson promoting cigarettes is probably something you wouldn't see today. The afro as a part of marketing directly to African Americans. You might not know this, but many people, if you ask them, who smokes Newports, it's usually people African American who smoke Newports. So there's a kind of like demographic twist to advertising, or at least they focus on different groups. For advertisement here, they're blending, the interest in the afro and maybe Black Power with, smoking cigarettes. You gotta love how she's looking up at him like adoringly as he's smoking. Giving 7 Up to a baby, that makes sense to me. Why not? It's better than Sprite, I guess. The kids seem to be loving it. The idea of advertising soda to children today is probably crazy to us. But we had to go through this sort of the growing pangs of and here it says, G mommy, you sure enjoy your Marlboro. Ouch. It says, born gentle, proud mothers, please forgive us if we too feel something of the pride of a new parent. Oh boy. So fortunately, we've left behind this era of advertising cigarettes to new mothers. But I'd say one day we'll be judged too by the future. So, hindsight is 2020. But it's neat to think about, this era of materialism. There is something democratic about it. It does kind of equalize everyone. It makes life a little easier. But what about the art world? The art world almost doesn't even resemble the materialism, and that is something that will shift by the time we get to Andy Warhol, because the art world becomes almost this cathedral of abstract expressionism that you see here, very much in the style of Pablo Picasso on the lower right. Wilfredo Lam is another protege of Pablo Picasso. He's a Cuban artist. But Jackson Pollock is really the definitive artist after World War II, very unlike Norman Rockwell, really night and day. This is abstract, pure abstraction, taking that European influence and pushing it to the almost a point of absurdity. I mean, I love Jackson Pollock, I love his work, but I can understand why a lot of people would find a hard time looking much more than 10 minutes at it. And moving on, because you're not looking at something, you're kind of experiencing his process. You're experiencing his performance of making. Some people say this is the kind of art that gives rise to the performance art movement, because now art is not about the final product so much as the final product being a recording of the performance. And he did do things that I think are notable, like listening to jazz as he's making his artwork. He's splattering his paint, he's throwing it, flinging it, and so he's definitely doing things that are, are trailblazing in a certain sense with the world of art, pushing the envelope, pushing modern, postmodern art to the point where pushing modern art into postmodern art. But I think it pushes it into like a dead end. And I think he would acknowledge that too, because he ended up not killing himself, but dying in a car wreck, killing the woman who was driving with him. And his artwork had already reached kind of a dead end. So his sudden demise, I think, is a real reflection on just his art reaching a kind of cul-de-sac and not really knowing where to go with his style. And his mentor was this guy, much more naturalistic, much more realistic, much more populist, but also not very elitist or snobby or art worldy. And I think that's, important to remember that a lot of the 20th century is this, you have to decide, do you want to be more populist like Diego Rivera, or do you want to be more abstract like Pablo Picasso? And many artists today still, I think, have to face this idea of, are you speaking to kind of the art world? Are you speaking to the public at large? And does it matter? And will you find a lot of support from one group if you and lose it all from the other group? And I think that many artists have to walk that fine line between being relevant and meaningful, but also, of course, being true to their own voice and moving forward with their career. And Time Life writes about Jackson Pollock almost in a pejorative or condescending way. Like, is he the most famous? Is he the best living artist in America? And his wife, Lee Krasner, was a very talented artist too, from this period of abstract expressionism. Her colors are, something a little more feminine about her work. I say that in a positive way. But both are kind of, working at very large scale, very bold, very epic, very beautiful. But it's going against the grain with the rest of the culture, because the rest of the culture is deep into this pop culture materialistic kind of fever. And so eventually this pendulum has to get pushed the other direction, from stuff like this to Andy Warhol, because all this stuff is very nice, it's very beautiful. It's a wonderful almost antidote to the pain and trauma of World War II to have these abstract works that feel just so like almost escapist, but they're missing the whole era. They're not able to speak to this age of pop culture and materialism. And so this period of abstract expressionism lasts a few decades, but quickly fades or switches into pop art, as you can see there in the 1950s. And the age of, will be the age of Kennedy and television, and the importance of pop culture and dictating elections and other things like that. And so, yeah, comic books, artists who grow up reading comic books decide, well, hold on, I want to make my artwork about pop culture. So artists like Roy Lichtenstein come along and say, look, forget this abstract expressionist stuff. I want to make art that reflects the pop culture world around us. And of course, this doesn't solve any problems or it does make the art world perhaps more populist, but it still begs the question, like, hold on, if you're just copying a comic strip, are you making anything original? And so the art world continues to, I think, wrestle with this idea of how do you push the boundaries, but also how do you resolve this question of originality? Does it matter? And of course, today with AI, I think that question has reared its head with a vengeance. The importance and significance of originality. And that's not just a theoretical thing. It also means what's the value of your work of art if it's not original? And of course, Andy Warhol is a major figure from this era. And you might look at it, the tomato soup can. Now he's an artist who blends glamour and fashion and photography and pop culture, and is definitely one who makes art not about abstraction so much as about pop culture. And you could say that is why we should care about the Campbell soup can. But another thing you might think about is, well, in the context of nuclear war, you could look at the soup can as okay, this is like food security in the age of nuclear annihilation. Another way you could look at this is, well, if people are willing to eat this and call it and eat this and call it soup, it's a can that has nothing tomatoey about it except the red color, and it's almost as foreign to people throughout history as you can be in terms of food. No one would recognize this as food 100 years ago or 200 years ago, but it's tomato soup. And so I think you could say that Andy Warhol is saying, if you're willing to eat this and call it soup and say it's nourishing, well, why can't you look at this work of art and also say, yes, this is a nourishing work of art? And I think that's valid because I mean, if we're spending all day you know, putting our time into nonsense or BS, why can't nonsense or BS be the subject matter of our art? So unfortunately, a lot of the art world has to deal with maybe the specter of Andy Warhol haunting the art world and forcing a lot of artists to have to kind of get out of the shadow of Andy Warhol and go past pop culture. But even today, I think pop culture remains a very important subject matter in art. And these are the three artists who I think really define the contemporary art world today still, or at least led to a lot of the definitive traits like performance, combining everyday objects, pop culture, and form for form's sake. Here's Rauschenberg, a very famous artist. Here's my mom and JFK. If you guys want to know what my mom looks like, there she is waiting for John F. Kennedy. I guess he's flirting with this other woman in the foreground. But look at my mom wearing those white little gloves. So cute. And the assassination of President Kennedy definitely was a shock for the country and led right to the Beatles. The Beatles became popular in the wake of Kennedy's assassination. But this painting by Rauschenberg is one example of an artist trying to use abstract art, abstract expressionist art to address subject matter that's popular, that's meaningful, that's more than just living in this bubble, this kind of ivory tower bubble. And I don't think it's very successful. I think it's a worthy effort. He's trying to make a kind of requiem to Kennedy, honor the death of Kennedy, and celebrate him. He's doing significant. He's doing making thoughtful choices here. The finger extended implies movement. The angelic quality of the astronaut descending from outer space has a almost kind of religious quality to it. And even the painting itself feels like an icon, feels religious, like Jesus. He's, of course, someone who died, for what he believes, the country. So he's a martyr like Jesus Christ. So I think that's really what Rauschenberg's doing is trying to offer a kind of religious painting to celebrate John F. Kennedy and to honor his memory. Some people say that the picked part on the lower right is a reference to the expulsion. I don't know if I see that, maybe just the dotted line perhaps. But it's still hard to address pop culture stuff with this kind of abstract language the way without it feeling a little kind of forced. So I think Norman Rockwell is much better at being able to address pop culture changes than a lot of the abstract art can, of course, depending on the artist. So let's stop there. I think next class we'll talk about postmodernism and Banksy. And I think we have two more classes. So we'll have a class on Monday, and then we'll have a class, I think, again on December 1st. So on that note, I'm going to let you guys go. Make sure you look at your homework about picking a famous photograph and writing one paragraph about like the formal analysis of it, and then the historical significance of the photograph. And I hope you guys have a great weekend. Any questions from anyone? All right, great. Well, have a good day. I'll see you guys on Monday.